Richard Hayes never touched things he considered beneath him, and that included people. That was the first thing his assistant, Claire, had learned about him during her initial week on the job, 3 years ago. She had watched him step around a collapsed display in the lobby without breaking stride, without offering a hand, without acknowledging the young intern scrambling on the floor to reassemble it. He had a particular talent for erasing people from his field of vision, not with cruelty, exactly, but with something colder than cruelty. Indifference with a razor edge. The kind that left marks without ever touching you. So when Richard Hayes touched Marcus Webb, the entire office didn't just freeze. It stopped breathing. The morning had begun the way most Monday mornings began at Hayes Capital, with the low, electric hum of ambition. 41 people arriving in pressed shirts and polished shoes, coffee cups in hand, laptops already opened before coats were fully removed. The 32nd floor had a particular energy on Mondays. Richard set the tone for that, intentionally. He believed pressure was a management tool, the same way a surgeon believed in a scalpel. Applied correctly, it produced results. Applied constantly, it produced fear. Richard Hayes was not concerned with the difference. He had arrived at 8:47 a.m., which was 13 minutes earlier than his scheduled time and 23 minutes earlier than anyone expected him. That was another habit, arriving when people thought he wouldn't. Catching the unprepared. He moved through the open floor without greeting anyone, his phone already pressed to his ear, his eyes scanning screens as he passed without stopping. Numbers. Projections. Faces. He evaluated the way a machine evaluates input. Useful or not useful, relevant or irrelevant. Marcus Webb had arrived at 6:15 a.m. He always did. 22 years on this floor and Marcus had never once been late. Not through the winter of 2011 when the subway ran on a single line for 6 weeks. Not through his wife's surgery in 2019. Not through the morning his youngest daughter called from college in tears and he had spent 45 minutes on the phone in the stairwell talking her back from the edge of something dark, and then walked back to his cart, wrung out his mop, and finished the east corridor before anyone arrived. He did not speak about these things. He simply showed up. That was, in his philosophy, the most honest statement a person could make about themselves. By 8:55 a.m., Marcus had completed the lobby, the stairwells on floors 30 and 31, both restrooms on the executive level, and was finishing a slow, careful pass of the corridor outside the main boardroom. He moved with the kind of efficiency that people mistake for slowness, every motion deliberate, nothing wasted. The cart's wheels made a soft, familiar sound against the floor that most employees had learned to hear without registering. Background noise. Furniture in motion. The glass was on the edge of the refreshment station outside the boardroom. Someone had placed it there carelessly, balanced more off the surface than on it, a casualty of the morning rush that nobody had noticed or chosen to address. Marcus saw it the moment he rounded the corner. He reached for it with the same steady hands that had been reaching for things like this for 2 decades. But the cart's wheel caught the corner of the station's base at the wrong angle, and the glass tipped before his fingers closed around it. It fell. It shattered. The sound was sharp and bright and brief, a single note that rang through the corridor like a struck bell. Marcus was already bending to collect the pieces. He was not embarrassed. He was not flustered. In 22 years, he had broken things, spilled things, tracked mud across freshly mopped tiles when maintenance schedules collided with unexpected deliveries. These things happened. You cleaned them up. That was the entire philosophy, and it had never once failed him. He had 3 pieces in his hand when he heard the footsteps. Richard Hayes came around the corner mid-sentence, something about Frankfurt, something about a call that needed to happen before noon. His phone was pressed to his ear, his other hand moving in that clipped, impatient gesture he used when the world wasn't moving at the speed he required. He saw the shattered glass. He saw Marcus crouched on the floor. He saw the delay this created in his path, perhaps 2 additional seconds of navigation, and something in his expression shifted. Not rage, exactly. Something more practiced than rage. Contempt that had been so long indulged it no longer needed a reason. He stepped over a shard. Stopped. He lowered the phone from his ear without ending the call. The look he gave Marcus lasted only a moment, but it was the kind of look that compresses a person, reduces them to their function, their inconvenience, their failure to be invisible at the correct moment. Marcus looked up from the floor. Their eyes met. And then Richard Hayes raised his open hand and brought it across the older man's cheek with a sound that had no business being as loud as it was. The crack moved through the open floor like a current. Every keyboard stopped mid-keystroke. Every conversation dissolved mid-sentence. Claire, who had been walking toward the printer, stopped walking. Daniel from Risk Assessment, who had been laughing at something on his phone, stopped laughing. The two analysts nearest the corridor door had a clear sight line through the glass partition, and both of them would later say the same thing independently, that their first instinct was to check whether what they had just seen was real, because something in the brain resists the image of a 63-year-old man being struck by his employer in a corridor in the middle of a Monday morning. It resists it because accepting it requires accepting what kind of place you have been working in. 41 people processed that realization simultaneously. The silence that followed was not the silence of shock alone. It was the silence of 41 people suddenly understanding something about the room they had spent years inside, something that had always been true but had required this specific, irreversible moment to become visible. Careers built here. Lunches eaten at those desks. Late nights, early mornings, performance reviews, birthday cakes in the kitchen. And all of it inside a place where this was possible. Where this could happen at 9:02 on a Monday morning and no one had seen it coming because no one had been looking for it. Marcus Webb absorbed the blow without moving. That was the detail that would stay with every person in that office long after the day ended. He didn't stumble. He didn't reach for the wall. He didn't make a sound. He simply held his position, one knee on the floor, 3 pieces of broken glass in his steady hand, and he absorbed it with the particular stillness of a man who had, over the course of a long life, learned exactly who he was. The blow landed. It registered. And then it became something Marcus Webb had simply experienced, the way he had experienced difficult winters and hard years and losses that didn't make the news because they never do when they happen to people like him. He straightened slowly. All the way up. Unhurried. 6 feet. Nearly. He was taller than most people remembered, because most people weren't paying close enough attention. He stood at his full height and he looked at Richard Hayes, not with anger, not with fear, not with the particular expression of a man calculating his options, but with something that was almost impossible to name. Recognition, perhaps. The recognition of a man who has known all along exactly what another man is made of, and has simply been waiting for the moment when everyone else would know it too. And then Marcus Webb smiled. It was not a small smile. It was not the defensive smile of someone trying to diffuse a situation or manage a powerful person's ego. It was a real smile, deep, unhurried, reaching all the way to the eyes, the kind of smile that belongs to someone in possession of information that the room has not yet received. Richard Hayes, for the first time in a very long time, did not know what to do with what he was looking at. He opened his mouth, closed it. The phone was still live in his hand, the Frankfurt call still running, whoever was on the other end now listening to silence and the distant sound of 41 people not breathing. Marcus reached into the breast pocket of his uniform, unhurried, deliberate, the same way he did everything, and removed a single card. He held it for a moment. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has been carrying patiently for a very long time. Then he leaned forward and placed it, face up, in the center of the boardroom table. He stepped back. He looked at Richard Hayes one final time. And the entire office, every one of those 41 people, leaned almost imperceptibly forward, because something in the room had just shifted in a way that none of them could yet explain, and every single one of them needed, with a desperation that surprised them, to know what happened next. Nobody in that office knew that Marcus Webb owned the building. Not the floors. Not the lease. Not the corner offices with their floor-to-ceiling glass and their carefully curated views of the city below. The building, all 14 stories of it, from the underground parking structure to the rooftop mechanical room, purchased quietly, deliberately, through a private holding company called Webb Property Group 11 years ago, when this block was still undervalued and Richard Hayes was still a mid-level fund manager with a leased BMW and borrowed confidence. Marcus had read the neighborhood correctly before anyone in a suit had thought to look at it. He had walked these streets on his days off, coffee in hand, doing the kind of slow, patient math that people who have spent their lives making every dollar count are very good at doing. And when the moment came, he had moved. Nobody had known. That was not an accident. Marcus Webb had learned something early, something that most people spend their entire lives trying to unlearn. Visibility, he had come to understand, was a choice. And invisibility, wielded correctly, was not a limitation. It was leverage. For 11 years he had arrived at 6:15 in the morning, done his work with precision and care, watched the company above him grow inside a building that belonged to him, and said nothing. Not because he was ashamed. Not because he was hiding. But because he was watching. And because there is a particular kind of patience that only becomes possible when you already know how the story ends. The card he placed on the boardroom table had 4 lines on it. His name, Webb Property Group, a phone number, and a title that Richard Hayes, standing 3 feet away, read twice before his expression changed. Owner. The words sat on the table between them like something physical. Richard's mouth moved slightly, the beginning of a sentence that didn't know where it was going. His phone hand dropped another inch toward his side. The Frankfurt call, still live, still open, continued transmitting silence to whoever was waiting on the other end. Richard looked at the card. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the card again. And in that moment, in the space between one breath and the next, 41 people watched a man they had feared for years encounter, for the first time in recent memory, something he could not immediately control. Marcus did not fill the silence. He was extraordinarily good at not filling silence. 2 decades of early mornings and empty corridors had given him a relationship with quiet that most people never develop. He simply stood at his full height and let the room absorb what it had just received. Let Richard Hayes stand inside the information. Let it settle into the floor around him the way water settles, finding every crack, filling every space, becoming impossible to remove once it has gone where it has gone. Claire was the first person to move. She had been frozen near the printer for what felt, to her, like several minutes, though the clock on the wall said 40 seconds had passed since Marcus placed the card. She took 3 steps forward, not toward Richard, not away from him, just forward, in the direction of the corridor, because her body needed to confirm with its own proximity what her eyes had already delivered. She stopped at the glass partition. She looked at the card on the table. She looked at Marcus. And something in her face rearranged itself quietly and completely. 3 years of coffee she had fetched that she hadn't been asked to fetch. 3 years of schedules managed and blame absorbed and weekends interrupted, and the particular exhaustion of working at close range to a man who treated the people around him as extensions of his own requirements. 3 years. And the man who mopped the floors had owned the building for 11 of them. She exhaled. It was not a dramatic exhale. It was the exhale of a person setting something down that they hadn't realized they were still carrying. Richard Hayes found his voice approximately 90 seconds after he lost it. He said Marcus's name, the first time, in 22 years, that he had said it, and the sound of it in his mouth was wrong in a way that everyone present could hear. Too late. Too careful. The name of a man he had never once considered, suddenly requiring pronunciation. He began a sentence about misunderstandings. He used the word context. He reached for the phone in his pocket, not the live one, the other one, in a gesture that Marcus recognized immediately for what it was. A man reaching for the levers he was accustomed to pulling. Marcus watched this with the same expression he had worn since standing up from the floor. Patient. Clear. Entirely unbothered. He reached into his pocket, his own pocket, unhurried as always, and made a single call. 4 words. A name, and a floor number. He ended the call and returned the phone to his pocket and folded his hands in front of him and waited with the serenity of a man who has spent a lifetime being underestimated and has made his peace with all of it. Security arrived in 11 minutes. Not the building security that reported to Hayes Capital's operations manager. Marcus's security, 2 men from the firm he personally contracted, who knew this building the way Marcus knew it, which was to say completely. They arrived without drama, without raised voices, without any of the theatre that Richard Hayes might have used in their position. They were simply present, and then the situation was different, and then Richard Hayes was escorted from the 32nd floor with his phone and his jacket and nothing else, and the door closed behind him with a sound so ordinary that it was almost funny. Almost. The office did not erupt. That was the thing that surprised people afterward, when they described the morning to spouses and friends over dinner. There was no cheering, no immediate burst of released tension. The 41 people who had witnessed everything simply stayed where they were for a moment, recalibrating, processing the distance between where the morning had started and where it had arrived. Some of them looked at each other. Some of them looked at the boardroom table, where the card still Saturday. Some of them looked at their own hands, their own desks, the work they had been doing 11 minutes ago as though it was simply another Monday. Marcus collected his cart from the corridor. He wheeled it to the supply room on the east side of the floor, the same supply room he had used for 22 years, and he stored it with the same care he always used, hanging the mop at the correct angle, latching the cabinet the way he preferred it latched. Then he walked back across the open floor, past the desks, past the people who were now watching him with the kind of attention they had never once directed at him before, and he opened the door to the CEO's office. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The office was large. Corner position, 2 walls of glass, the city spread out below in every direction. A desk that cost more than Marcus's first car. Chairs that had been selected by an interior consultant. Art on the walls that someone had chosen for the impression it made rather than any feeling it produced. Marcus looked at all of it without particular admiration or particular judgment. He was simply taking inventory, the way he always did when he entered a space for the first time. Noting what was there. Noting what was needed. He walked to the desk and sat down. The chair was good. He had to admit that. He adjusted it slightly, habit, and then he picked up the desk phone and made the second call of the morning. This one was longer. His attorney. His property manager. A board member he had known for 9 years who had been expecting this call for longer than that. His voice throughout was the same voice he used for everything. Even, unhurried, specific. The voice of a man who has thought carefully about what he is going to say before he says it, every time, without exception. It was during this call that the clapping started. 1 person. Then 3. Then all of them, all 41, in the kind of applause that doesn't require coordination because it comes from the same place in every person simultaneously. Not performance. Not relief, exactly. Something older than relief. The recognition of something true being confirmed. A kind of collective exhale that the room had needed for longer than any single morning. Marcus finished his call. He set the phone down. He looked through the glass wall of the office at the 41 people who had spent years inside a building they had never thought to question, working for a man none of them would miss, in a place that had been quietly, patiently held by someone none of them had ever truly seen. He let the applause run. He did not stand. He did not raise a hand. He did not perform the moment in any direction. He simply sat at the desk that was now, in every practical and official sense, his to sit at, and he looked out through 14 stories of his own glass at the city that had taught him everything he knew about patience, about timing, about the extraordinary power of knowing exactly who you are and being entirely willing to wait until the right morning to show everyone else. The clapping continued for a long time. Nobody wanted to be the last one to stop. And Marcus Webb, for the first time in 22 years on that floor, let himself be seen.